Part 13. Infinite Doomsday Start Draws Luodu Mechanic. Author, Shanmao Aichiji. Chapter 121. Everyone, are you ready? Minerva, all right. Sarah, yes. Tia, don't worry, Luigi. Very good, Ruger, who was sitting in the driver's seat of the tank, nodded, let's go. Taiwan Novel Network rightward arrow dot. Boom. With the roar of the engine, Ruger drove a huge, more than 50 tons of modified Ferdinand heavy tank destroyer from the mysterious underground laboratory back to the underground city. Google search reading. This country's tank destroyer has been mentioned before. The main gun is an anti-tank gun, without a turret or the turret is immovable. The name of the Ferdinand heavy tank destroyer comes from Ferdinand Porsche. Well, it is the Porsche of the future sports car brand. This person's main business is car design, and he was recruited to build military vehicles during World War II. The most famous work is the Porsche version of the Tiger, which competes with the Henschel version of the Tiger heavy tank designed by Henschel. But because it used a more advanced but unstable electric transmission system, the Porsche version lost in the end, and the Henschel version became the Tiger I, which was once a big name. However, dozens of Porsche versions were produced, and after improvements, they became the Ferdinand heavy tank destroyer. This is the precious toy that the Ghost leader E-52 left for himself in the Ghost laboratory. But if it is the original Ferdinand tank destroyer, this thing does not meet Luger's combat needs at all. As we all know, tanks are offensive vehicles, and the corresponding tank destroyers that are specially designed for anti-tank are actually defensive vehicles. So there are only tank destroyers but no tanks in this secret arsenal. So the Ghosts used tank destroyers to ambush Luger before. But now Luger and his 4 men are going to rush out of the Ghost dungeon, and even rush out of the evil cave full of nightmare monsters. Using a defensive tank destroyer is not a good match at all. Let's say it's an anti-tank gun. Who is it going to fight? Machine gun crab? Or another cyber dragon? So under Ruger's modification, this main gun became the 88mm rapid-fire mortar howitzer. In fact, this modified Ferdinand should be called a self-propelled artillery or self-propelled mortar howitzer. In addition, the chassis derived from the Porsche version of the Tiger heavy tank was also greatly modified by Ruger. Although Ruger also wanted to say that the 1970s and 1980s had passed from World War II to his era, and the electric transmission was not mature at that time, but it should have matured later. But the fact is that the main battle tanks of his era still did not use electric transmission. The so-called electric transmission means that the transmission system uses electric drive. This seems to be nonsense. If you have fiddled with the engine, you should have heard of the speed, which is a very important performance unit of the internal combustion engine. This is because the direct movement mode of the engine's output is the rotation of the crankshaft. After that, the transmission device is needed to transmit this rotation until it is transmitted to the drive wheel to make it rotate. The device responsible for transmission in the middle is the transmission device. The transmission device of early tanks was mechanical, which is the kind commonly seen in steampunk and other genre films, with a large gear set in a small gear. The initial rotation is transmitted to the power wheel by the mutual drive of the gears. Electric transmission is to transmit the movement to the power wheel through the motor. The simplest electric transmission is that the main engine rotates and generates electricity at the same time, and the chemical energy of the internal combustion engine is converted into mechanical energy of the crankshaft movement, and then converted into electrical energy through electromagnetic induction. Finally, the power wheel is driven by electrical energy to drive the entire vehicle. The biggest problem is that the efficiency of electrical energy conversion is not high, resulting in insufficient output and poor stability of the entire equipment. Ruger himself cannot solve these problems. At most, he transplanted a more mature hydraulic transmission in later generations. But it doesn't matter. As a Chinese with a Red family background, Ruger firmly believes in one sentence, If we don't have guns or cannons, the enemy will build them for us. The two Maybach HL-120 TRM engines on the Ferdinand tank, which had a total of less than 500 horsepower, were really unusable. The two big guys together are just slightly stronger than the monster engine of his muscle car. On the one hand, you can imagine how abnormal the power of American muscle cars in the late 1960s and early 1970s was. On the other hand, it is enough to explain why Ferdinand has the title of Scrap Iron Man. It has electric transmission, but the two engines are still so useless. But it doesn't matter if the original engine is not powerful, the kind-hearted Ghost Leader E52 has already given an improved version. That is the engine of the two-tank chassis that it uses as skateboards for its cyber barbarian dragon. Although one was blown up by Minerva's Savior Mother, the cost of repairing it in the short term will be relatively high, but the other one was recovered intact by Ruger. The engine used in the chassis is actually the MT-902V-1010 cylinder multi-fuel engine of the Puma infantry fighting vehicle. Moreover, there are two of them. The maximum horsepower of a single engine of this type can exceed 1000, and 2000 horsepower is enough to give Ferdinand a completely different mobility. What's more, the original Ferdinand weighed nearly 70 tons, so it could only run at a speed of 20 to 30 km per hour with less than 500 horsepower. But after being greatly reduced in weight by Luger, mainly by replacing the armor plates with new models and changing the main gun, the vehicle now weighs only 50 tons. The power is enhanced to 4 times the original, and the weight is reduced by nearly 1/3 accordingly. The speed of this guy is naturally incomparable. Ruger tested it a little in the underground maze. If the ground is flat enough and does not collapse, it is no problem for this car to run 70 km per hour. It can be said that if the main gun is ignored, and the chassis sports performance is only considered, the tank modified by Ruger can reach the level of third-generation main battle tanks such as Leopard 2 tanks. Of course, there are gains and losses. In order to have stronger mobility, Ruger replaced the full set of decks and even attached explosive reaction to key parts. This is a considerable investment. In addition, anti-tank guns do not need turrets, but self-propelled mortars can rotate, so this place has also been greatly improved by Ruger. In the end, except for Ruger himself in the cockpit and Tia still operating the mortar in the gunner's position, the other two female heroes can only hang themselves on both sides of the turret through the fixed hooks on the armor. There is no room for two fully armed people in the car body. Fortunately, one of them was holding the HK-417 that Ruger had sent out, and the other was holding the 7mm heavy machine gun that Ruger had used before, which was mounted on a power exoskeleton. As a result, the two of them became secondary weapon pendants of the tank, which was quite interesting. There were 3 weapon operators, so Ruger, the driver, didn't need to be armed. But how could he hold back his desire to fight? Especially if you have seen the Ferdinand tank destroyer, you will notice that it is like a heavy self-propelled artillery, with the main turret at the rear of the chassis, leaving a large space in front. If the main gun was still the original large-caliber anti-tank gun, nothing would have to be mentioned. But now that Keshin Valley has been replaced with a rapid-fire mortar howitzer with a caliber of only 20+, Ruger has much more space to use. Infinite Doomsday Start draws Luodu mechanic. Author, Shanmao Aichiji. Chapter 122. Wu rumbling. With 4 times the roar of the Cougar infantry tank engine, Ruger finally drove the modified Ferdinand out of the factory. Google search reading. Writing this, I hope readers will remember our domain name Taiwan Novel Network rightward arrow. Although it was masked by the smell of various oil and glue lines in the cockpit, Luger still had a headache due to the smell outside that was mixed with gunpowder smoke and roasted protein. This made him immediately pull up the respirator mask with the filter. "You must wear a mask." Someone lamented something strange that no one could understand, and immediately shouted into the intercom, "Tia, let it out." "Okay." Before he finished speaking, the muzzle of the 88mm rapid-fire mortar in the turret had been raised. Phew! A grey cylindrical shadow flew out in response, reaching an altitude of several hundred meters. Just when it was about to turn and fall, two pairs of large aspect ratio wings popped out of its cylindrical body. At the same time, its head shell was pushed down from the inside out, exposing the propeller inside. This extended version of the special cannonball actually turned into a small propeller plane in an instant. Simba, turn on the camera and put the picture through, Ruger immediately added after seeing it flying smoothly. Soon, footage from an aerial perspective appeared on his mobile phone and the tablet held by Tia. It was the perspective of the camera on the propeller plane driven by Shadow Link's Lao Now Noisy. This aircraft is a gun-launched reconnaissance drone that Ruger barely made up by using existing materials and the flexible use of Lao Now Noisy to make up for the lack of flight control procedures. It can be regarded as a simplified version of the artillery-launched cruise missile. After all, Ruger doesn't need to equip this thing with a warhead, and it can't be called a loitering missile. Wow, Brother Lou, this thing is really clear. Is this the true strength of Lost One's technology? The knowledgeable Tia immediately exclaimed when she saw the clear picture. Almost. Lugger didn't know how to give a better answer, so he could only deal with it with ambiguity. To say this thing is advanced, it itself is not advanced. Ruger just used some monitoring equipment in the laboratory and some old World War II machinery to create it. It can be said that it is not advanced, but the fact that this thing can be made is also a reflection of the all-round improvement of technology to a certain level. How is the situation outside the arsenal? Lugger asked again. Well, it's pretty much what we guessed before, Tia said, densely dense and mysterious. The direction of the main entrance is blocked. As mentioned earlier, this World War II arsenal camp was built at the bottom of a mountain valley, surrounded by mountains on three sides and with a gate on one side. Flying monsters can be found in all directions, Tia added. There are no signs of rushing in for the time being. By the way, Brother Lou, don't you have receiving equipment there? You can see for yourself. The screen is too small and hurts the eyes, Ruger casually said. A reason. Everyone, please hold your seats tight, it's time to start the train. What? Before he finished speaking, the four engines roared again. The sound of the engines alone gave people the feeling of thousands of guns firing. At the same time, demonic Ferdinand rushed directly to the door. This place was once filled with all kinds of light and heavy weapons used for World War II defense, from machine guns to machine cannons to anti-aircraft guns. But in the previous battle, they were all destroyed by Lugger. But now there are only the charred orc corpses left here, and the damaged weapons have been recycled into raw materials by Lugger. Stab, sting. The behemoth, weighing about 50 tons, rampaged through the camp at a speed of 60 km per hour, crushing over the corpses like a sack, making it look particularly ferocious. Even though the ghosts blocking the gate were not too smart, they were so frightened that they retreated when they saw this thing suddenly rushing out of the camp. Start now, fight them all out, Lugger shouted, and the hand holding the steering wheel tightened the trigger. Tsitsize. Fully 4 M3 general-purpose machine guns fired at the same time, shooting back and forth directly in front of the car, immediately clearing a large area. This is the last vehicle-mounted weapon Ruger prepared for himself, a remote-controlled machine gun platform. It is extremely simple and easy to replace, and the loss is not distressing. Hearing the fire from the front, Tia immediately took action from behind, adjusting the muzzle and shooting out mortar shells one after another like a machine gun. This improved rapid-fire cannon can empty a 5-round magazine in 2 seconds. The speed is not as fast as a machine gun, but it is comparable to an ordinary machine gun. And this is just the beginning. I saw Tia, who was controlling the mortar over there. She didn't use the automatic loader, so she took out the full magazines and loaded them into the newly emptied bullet inlet. With Tia's quickness, as soon as the 5 cannonballs over there were fired, 5 new cannonballs were already connected. Just like that, in just 10 seconds, she fired dozens of shells. If the continuous firing had not caused the barrel to overheat and needed to be cooled down, Tia could have continued to fight. Each 6 kg 88 mm mortar shell contains nearly a kilogram of explosives. Under the action of the explosive detonation wave, the remaining nearly 5 kilograms of prefabricated fragments can scatter around with extremely high kinetic energy. Even the machine gun crab will be killed or injured within 5 or even 10 meters of the impact point of such a shell, and the ordinary charm is even more powerless to resist. Now dozens of artillery shells were fired, directly creating a huge gap of 60 or 70 meters in diameter in the dense group of ghosts. However, there were so many ghosts that it was not an exaggeration to say that it was a sea of ghosts. It was simply a replay of Ruger's novice village. As a result, the gap was like a sudden extraction of water from the sea, and the surrounding sea water would quickly spread over to fill the gap. However, in this way, the calm water surface would flow, and moving in the direction of the flow would reduce the resistance. It was like going downstream, or sailing with the wind. Ruger, who had just crashed into the sea of ghosts from the gate, just went downstream, while continuing to use machine guns to clear obstacles in front, and rushed to the center of the explosion. The two on both sides of the tank turret were not idle either, using their own firepower to deal with the patrol bees and other flying ghosts flying in the air. It was very lively for a while. After Tia in the turret used the freezing agent made of magic sapphire to quickly cool the barrel, she repeated the same trick and fired a series of rapid shots again to create a second gap. After repeated attacks, within a few minutes, the heavy tanks rushed out of the valley from the dense sea of zombies. "How is it, Simba? What's the change behind the ghosts?" Ruger was doing 3 things at once: driving, shooting, and asking. "We are continuously replenishing soldiers, all of whom are basic cannon fodder." "Lu, no high-level ghosts. No, there are not even ghosts that use artillery." Tia immediately interrupted, "It's normal that there are no artillery? Maybe it's because we destroyed their artillery base." "Lu, destroying their arsenal will definitely have an impact, but it shouldn't be so obvious." He thought for a while and asked again, "Simba, fly a little to the periphery, and pay attention to maintaining altitude. Their flying ghosts can't easily hit you. Go and see what's happening at the edge of the dungeon." "Understood." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Infinite Doomsday Start draws Luodu mechanic. Author, Shan Mao Ai-chi-ji. Chapter 123. Near an entrance to the outer maze passage of the ghostly dungeon. Google search reading. Google searched can. On the back of a giant centipede ghostly, there are 6 or 7 triple gun turrets from the era of World War II, giant warships and cannons. The highest one has no guns, and is a lookout command structure similar to the bridge of a battleship. In the bridge, a figure is observing the battle in the dungeon outside the passage through a telescope. That person, like Tia and Sarah, is also wearing a set of Iron Man armor. However, there are many places on this armor that have been transformed into additional weapon mounting points. Obviously, in addition to this armor, it also has a complete set of external weapons. The overall color of this person's armor is brown, which is very similar to the color of its giant centipede-style land battleship. Taurus, stop looking. What can you see if you look again? The new Pope ordered us to let those people go. Do you dare to send troops to keep them? On the sofa not far from the brown armored man called Taurus, there were 2 iron men wearing plain armor. The speaker's milky white helmet mask was open, revealing a beautiful face. Virgo is right. Since the new Pope has appeared, we can only obey orders and stop thinking about competing for the Mother God's relics, the grey armored Iron Man next to him also said. Of course, This does not mean that the offensive and defensive alliance between the three of us will be invalidated. We can still help each other and share what we have, right? Besides, my bird told me that the alliance of the other three families still shows no signs of separation. Capricorn, tell your bird to be careful. Those people seem to be able to spot them from a long distance. The brown man put down the telescope and stood up. The new pope has been born, so we don't need to fight anymore. But the order she sent us only let us let those humans go this time, not in the future. The earlier you prepare, the sooner you will benefit. You are so stubborn, so be it. The three humanoid Iron Man ghost commanders were still chatting, but no one noticed a faint cat figure flashing across the top of the bridge. On the other side, Ruger and Tia were shocked by the memory sketch that old Noisy sent back like a photo. The ghost actually has this kind of armor, Tia asked. You just left the reconnaissance drone and almost let it fall, just to see this. Compared to the three Iron Man ghosts, shouldn't you be more surprised by their giant spider land battleships, Ruger said, resisting the urge to complain. In addition to the E-52 that he killed, the ghost here also has 12 deputy commanders, and he had heard about it from old Noisy a long time ago. At that time, he wanted to complain that there were exactly 12, not more or less. I wonder if it was the heavenly stems and earthly branches or the zodiac. Now, there are really 12 gold saints, plus the monotheistic religion mentioned by E-52. Really, they did a full show. Brother Lou, do you think the prototypes of these three humanoid ghosts are also monsters? Tia asked. I always feel that the virgin who showed her face looks familiar. Like a fallen rogue. It's very likely, Lugger sighed. The Capricorn next to her has a goat head, most likely a half-goat from the Moon Clan. The Moon Clan is a goat-shaped half-orc, a medium-sized demon that is very common on the battlefield near Rogue Town. Then do you think the prototype of the Taurus is a huge beast or a barbarian? Tia asked again. The Iron Man named Taurus is the tallest of the three. Well, maybe, it's a minotaur. The minotaur in the Diablo 2 world is the cow that took up arms to slaughter humans in the hidden level cow level, a demonized animal. Well, Tia nodded without comment, and asked, Brother Lou, what do you think they are discussing? Are they going to attack us with that land battleship? Well, it's a pity that old Noisy didn't record the sound. After hearing what Tia said, Ruger felt a pity. But he also knew that old Noisy had taken a big risk to bring the footage back, and it wouldn't be too risky to let him record in the bridge. In the past, Tia only regarded old Noisy as a shadow creature. It had no entity and was immune to magic, so it seemed that no one could hurt it. Now Ruger has discovered that its essence is likely to be some kind of electronic life form, so it is not ruled out that the ghost who masters electronic technology has some means to target it. It's better to be careful. It doesn't matter, old Noisy just needs to pay attention to the changes on the battlefield. Ruger thought about it and said. Squeak. I didn't expect that old Noisy actually roared twice secretly. Lugger didn't react at first, and it took a long time before he realized that it was old Noisy complaining that he didn't call it Simba. Aha, I'm sorry, Simba, keep it up, Lugger added with a bit of a smile. Whoa, old Noisy howled with satisfaction and continued to control the plane to conduct external reconnaissance. How can you talk to Luge like that? Tia scolded him with dissatisfaction, turned to Lugger and said, you are too good to it, this guy is the easiest to get ahead of others. What, Lion King Simba, you just call it old Noisy, do you think it dares not to agree? Whoa, old Noisy muttered. Tia stretched out the tone, as if to say, do you have any objection? Do you dare to have any objection? Whoa, old Noisy immediately quieted down. Ruger shook his head helplessly, but after thinking about it, he decided to use the same name as Tia to save trouble. Well, old Noisy, your master has spoken, you should adapt to it and pay attention to safety. Whoa. As expected, Old Noisy did not resist and honestly accepted Ruger's new name for it. Hey, you two, don't flirt when you get a chance, fight well. Minerva, hanging on the side of the turret, had unknowingly emptied a 200-round box of ammunition. At this time, hearing them chatting here, I couldn't help but come over to complain while changing the bullets. It seemed that she was a little guilty. As soon as she said this, the firepower density of the front machine gun and the roof artillery immediately increased by 2 levels. Unknowingly, everyone had actually rushed out of the underground arsenal camp. The current location is a small hill between the two towers. Although the terrain here is not easy to walk, the geological conditions are okay, with more stones and harder ground, which is much better than the muddy land that is easy to collapse. Ruger was also glad that he gave up a lot of space in the car and forced the modified Ferdinand to install 4 high-horsepower engines. Otherwise, with the current road conditions, it is likely that he will be surrounded by the Ghost group again. At this time, the next step should be to choose a weak point of the enemy and rush into the edge channel of the underground city. But Ruger carefully looked at the enemy distribution map that Lao Guozhao had just updated, and he had given up the idea of breaking through the channel. Because there are 3 giant ghost weapons that are as huge as the giant centipede land battleship before. These 4 are really evenly distributed in the 4 directions around. No matter where Ruger rushes, he may be attacked by at least 2 giant weapons. Infinite Doomsday Start draws Luodu mechanic. Author, Shan Mao Ai Chi Ji. Chapter 124. After charging for a while, Lugger gradually slowed down. Google search reading. What's wrong? Why don't you charge? Minerva asked curiously. No, plan to, Lugger sighed. Plan to? Okay, I'll prepare it right away. Tia jumped out of the turret excitedly, opened the turret cover, and started working on the cannon. Do you really want a plan to? Minerva said with regret. Can you bear to abandon this big guy? This guy is heavy and hard, and it's so useful when charging. Are you really willing to do it? Ha, you can't bear to do it, right? Tia couldn't help laughing. Don't worry, this kind of thing, Lugger can have as many as he wants, don't worry. Tia, as always, blindly trusts someone's ability. Really, Minerva still didn't believe it, but thinking about what happened during the time when she was alone with Lugger, she felt that Tia was not talking nonsense. Then, I want a big one like this. It's rumbling, so exciting. I'll give you one, can you drive it? Ruger almost laughed at her lion's big mouth. You can teach me, or let little Tia teach me. Let's not talk about this for now. How can you fire a cannon by yourself? Who will be your cannon man? Tia asked immediately. Cannon? What kind of cannon do you want? Minerva looked puzzled. Hang big blades all around me, I'll just drive my car to hit it. What kind of cannon do you want? Ha! Hearing her say this, the two of them both thought of the honey badger at the beginning, and couldn't help but snorted at the same time. Let's talk about it later. Ruger recovered first, waved his hand and said, get ready first, I'll send you up first. Me? Why? Minerva asked curiously. Because you are the heaviest, X2. Ruger and Tia said at the same time. Soon, Ruger drove the modified Ferdinand up a hill, with the front of the car pointing diagonally to the sky, and at the end was a Tower of Babel. On Tia's side, she also raised the angle of the cannon and installed something like a small airplane on the muzzle. Yes, the so-called second plan is to abandon the land route and take the air route. Principle, the human cannon of the circus. Seeing that Ruger and Tia were both ready, Minerva hesitated again, and finally took herself off the side armor reluctantly and walked under the muzzle. Are you really going? She looked up at the simple seat on the muzzle and looked at Tia. Hurry up, while there are not many enemies now, go up quickly, Tia urged. Also, put all your weapons that can be stored in your space capsule. Mine can only hold a few knives, but can't hold this thing. Minerva pointed to the heavy machine gun on the shoulder bracket. It doesn't matter if those dozens of kilograms, Ruger hurriedly urged. Tia, give her the maximum dose. Okay, Tia nodded immediately and raised her hand to Minerva. Alas, Minerva knew she couldn't avoid this, so she jumped and pulled onto the seat. It was called an airplane, but it was actually more of an airplane-like model. It looked like a cork was stuffed into the muzzle of a gun, and the other end of the cork was a large aspect ratio model airplane. After Minerva jumped on it, she lay down in the middle of the model airplane, holding or stepping on the bracket with her hands and feet, so that she could fit tightly into the fuselage. Are you ready? Tia shouted. All right. Remember to turn on that thing in time. I'm not afraid of others, but I'm afraid that you don't have enough power, Ruger added. Understood, Minerva shouted again. Okay, 3, 2, 1, go, Tia shouted and fired the first shot at the same time. Boom. The large steel frame and skin model airplane on the muzzle was ejected by such a simple and crude gunpowder catapult with extremely high risk and loss. The large model aircraft flew obliquely forward and upward, barely holding on for more than 100 meters before gradually disintegrating. First, the sporadic structure of the wing part quickly spread to the fuselage, and finally the outer skin simply fell off together, revealing the extremely simple steel frame inside. At the same time, due to the huge change in shape, the gliding speed of the model aircraft dropped greatly. At this time, Minerva above was at least tens of meters away from the Babel Tower in front of her horizontally. Not to mention that the vertical height did not reach the ideal number at this time. Even if she reached the Babel Tower, Minerva would have to continue to climb more than 100 meters by herself to reach the top of the tower. Hurry up, Ruger below shouted when he saw this. Got it, Minerva roared, her hands and feet retracted inward at the same time, and then pressed down and detached from the iron frame. Then she hit a part of her chest with her left fist, and several rockets on the back and legs of her self-made Iron Man armor started and ignited at the same time, spewing flames obliquely to the rear. With the help of several rocket boosters, Minerva accelerated like a ballistic missile that had just been launched, flying higher up the Tower of Babel. Soon, she crashed headfirst into the halo near the top of the Tower of Babel. However, although the rocket engine consumed all its fuel after only working for 1 or 2 seconds, the kinetic energy it gave her was not low. In the end, this part of the kinetic energy directly knocked her into the Tower of Babel. Are you okay? Tia asked hurriedly below. It's okay, Minerva, who was completely embedded in the Tower of Babel, barely took her hands out and waved them weakly. It shouldn't be a big problem. Tia smacked her lips and said somewhat guiltily, anyway, there is a life potion in her armor, right, Luodu? Oh, right, Luodu also felt guilty. He couldn't remember whether he had equipped Minerva's armor with an automatic life recovery potion. Sister Sarah, you're next. Tia turned her head and looked at the Blood Crow who was holding the HK-417 and firing continuously on the other side. Well, okay. No, since you can successfully send Minerva up, you two can just go together, Luodu said. You two together are not as heavy as her alone. Then what can you do? There are so many ghosts, Tia replied immediately. Didn't you notice that the strength of the ghosts rushing over has decreased during this period? Luodu stood up in the cockpit and pointed his finger around. Besides, the faster we go, the fewer ghosts we will encounter, right? Okay, seeing him say that, Tia stopped struggling and immediately took out the second set of aircraft model components from the turret, quickly assembled them together, and made appropriate adjustments for 2 people to use at the same time. Soon, the second set of aircraft models was inserted into the muzzle. Blood Raven Sarah's actions were much more straightforward than Minerva's. She jumped lightly on the side armor of the turret and jumped onto the aircraft model frame. Tia praised and jumped up in the same way. Ruger had already climbed up the turret from the cockpit, checked the propellant in the barrel, nodded to the 2 of them, and sent the 2 women into the sky again. Infinite Doomsday Start draws Luodu Mechanic. Author, Shan Mao Ai Chi Ji. Chapter 125. The genuine Iron Man is really useful. Ruger, who stayed on the ground, couldn't help but sigh at the two women's light and flexible figures. Completely different from the camouflage armor he made with Iron Man materials, the armor on the two women looked at least tens of kilograms, but in fact it might be only a few kilograms. In addition, the two women themselves were not very heavy, so it was not an exaggeration to say that they were as light as a swallow. Even if there were no energy nozzles on the base Iron Man and could not get extra acceleration, the word light alone was enough for them to reach the halo at the top of the tower. Huh. Ruger took a deep breath and prepared himself to get on the last glider. Before leaving, he fired all the smoke bombs on the modified Ferdinand to hinder the surrounding ghost siege and attack. In this way, not only could the ghosts not see him, but even the three women on the Tianzu had lost his trace. At this time, he was not in a hurry. Taking advantage of the smoke screen, he opened fire, took out dozens of howitzers from the logistics space, and bombarded the ghost in the smoke screen. It was not until the score in his system panel jumped to 3,000 points that he stopped in time, recovered all the howitzers, and sat on the muzzle glider himself. While he flew out, he did not forget to recover the modified Ferdinand. He did not build helpers such as automatic robots. The one who controlled the howitzer before was not someone else, but himself, who had the ability of telekinesis. Other people's telekinesis is how to bend a spoon, and his telekinesis is the most pure in two ways: long-distance retraction and release of vehicle artillery, and remote control of the firing pin to fire the shell primer. Remotely control dozens of artillery to fire in sequence, then recover them to the logistics space to complete the loading, and then put them back to continue. This is the most powerful move Ruger has mastered so far. However, this move is too scary to use, and will cause too many unnecessary questions, so he only dares to use it in smoke bombs. So is his telekinesis ability very strong now? Not bad. It can't be said to be weak, nor can it be said to be strong. So, although he had a lot of fun just now, it consumed a lot of energy. When the catapult ejected the glider, he had to wait until the catapult was completely out of the muzzle before recovering the chariot. At this time, the glider was already very fast. Even if he only took 1 second to complete the recovery, the moment of completion was at least tens of meters or even hundreds of meters away from the original chariot. This kind of telekinesis recovery in a very short time, very long distance, and the target was a very large chariot, which consumed his energy more. When the glider was about to fly near the Tongtian pillar, he was almost half fainted. Damn, careless, he couldn't help but cursed inwardly, and took out 2 injections of mental strengthening potion and injected them into himself. The higher the mental attribute, the higher the upper limit of magic power or telekinesis for him. It can support him to use telekinesis more times. After finishing this, he gave himself another mental supplement potion, and finally recovered from the semi-dizziness before the glider hit the Babel. Brother Lu, hurry. In the roar of Tia, he jumped hard after recovering, jumped off the glider and turned on the rocket booster, and finally caught Tia's little hand at the last moment. Come up! Tia shouted, and threw Ruger below to the top of the Babel tower with one hand. Ah, Brother Lu, your armor. Finding that she was using too much force, Tia hurried over and found that it was not herself who almost made Ruger crash into the ceiling, but his armor that suddenly disappeared. The armor disappeared, which meant that he suddenly became dozens or even hundreds of kilograms lighter. Her force was still direct, which would naturally make Ruger fly up faster. It's okay, I've recycled it, Ruger hurriedly called out, and took out a set of iron claw-like gloves, and directly grabbed the ceiling of the top of the Tower of Babel. The so-called Tower of Babel is not only the supporting column of the ceiling ground of the ghostly underground city, but also the passage for Ghostly to leave the underground city and enter the ground. So the so-called Tower of Babel is actually the Babel Pillar. The so-called top of the Tower of Babel is the ceiling of the underground city. And Ruger is now using 2 iron claw gloves to grab the ceiling while sticking pieces of explosives on it. He put more than 10 kilograms of explosives on the 1 meter square ceiling, then removed the claws and jumped back to the light source ring near the top of the Babel pillar. Everyone, hold on tightly and pay attention to defense. Detonate. After a loud explosion, the soil on the ceiling fell like a rainstorm. Behind the rainstorm, a ray of not-so-bright ground light shone in. It's done. Everyone, I'll go first. Before the 4 people on the halo at the top of the tower had time to rush out, the old noisy man who was controlling the drone turned around and rushed into the gap. After a while, the 4 people finally climbed back to the ground again. But before they could sit down and rest, Ruger pulled the 3 women and ran further away. Still running? I see those ghosts are no longer chasing us, so it should be safe, right? Minerva was reluctant. Her heavy armor had the highest tonnage, and it was the most laborious when she climbed up, and she consumed the most physical energy. No wonder she didn't want to go anymore. Aren't you afraid that it will suddenly collapse and you will fall in again? Ruger asked back. Hurry up, Minerva heard it, and carried Ruger on her shoulder, and ran away in 2 steps. Hurry, turn right, and go forward to another Babel tower, Ruger said hurriedly. This escape took another 10 minutes, and the 4 of them finally rested against a stone wall. This place must be safe, Minerva asked Ruger with lingering fear. This should be near the maze, at least it won't fall into the underground city. Ruger took out his mobile phone and looked at it. Noisy, old Noisy, where are you? Ruger called the drone. However, there was an endless rustling sound on the other end of the walkie-talkie. It's broken, there is interference on the ground, and the radio can't be used again, he couldn't help but sigh. Fortunately, soon, old Noisy rushed from not far away in its classic Shadow Lynx form and rushed into Tia's arms. It looked like he was whimpering and complaining. What? As soon as it flew up, the plane didn't obey, Tia was surprised. You tried for a long time, but couldn't control it, and it crashed into a rock and broke apart. Let me help you, plead with Brother Lou, don't punish you for the plane crash. Tia said, turning to look at Ruger. Didn't I say that the artillery drones are consumables, so if they crash, it's not your fault. Ruger waved his hand. Really, hearing that Ruger didn't blame him, the old noisy man who had just been lying in Tia's arms immediately jumped out and looked at Ruger. Well, can you give me another one? I've thought of a lot of new tricks, maybe I can solve the problem of electronic equipment anomalies. Let's talk about it later. Ruger waved his hand. Electronic equipment anomalies are easy to solve. Find a way to block the magic power, and it will definitely recover in minutes. But if you stay in a magic environment for a long time, you will suffer irreversible damage. After saying that, Ruger raised the mobile phone that suddenly flashed and exploded and turned the screen completely black, shook it at Laugueozeo, and put it away with a sigh. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Infinite Doomsday Start draws Luodu mechanic. Author, Shanmao Aichiji. Chapter 126. The magic power of the dark world can not only shield radio signals, but also destroy electronic components like nuclear radiation. Ruger, Tia, and Lauguaji all know this. They know it in concept. But none of them expected that the destructive effect would be so strong that Ruger's mobile phone would short-circuit and shut down. Ruger had never noticed this before. In addition to the fact that he had rarely used weapons with sensitive electronic components, it was probably related to the low magic concentration in the area at that time. In fact, the magic concentration here should not be so high. But this place is not far from the main battlefield of the monster army and the rogue guerrillas. It is probably because the escaped magic power has caused the radiation here to exceed the standard. That's right, after the Geiger counter's certification, the magic power of the dark world can also cause ionizing radiation of the original. But strangely, this kind of magic has no obvious negative effect on the human body. It seems that magic is between harmful radiation and harmless radiation. It feels a bit like strong electromagnetic radiation to Ruger. It is similar to EMP, which can cause extremely high damage to electronic components, but the damage to the human body is almost imperceptible. Although Ruger wanted to study the physical properties of magic in detail, he had too many things to do and not enough time. After the four of them rested for a while, Blood Crow Sarah, who had been quiet on the road, proposed to search for her team. Judging from the traces left on the ground battlefield, after losing the battlefield command, the raw guerrillas were indeed greatly affected, and the battle line clearly showed signs of retreat. But they retreated in an orderly manner, not a big rout of retreating thousands of miles. I must meet up with them as soon as possible and reorganize the defense line. Sarah looked determined. Even the most tired Minerva didn't dare to raise any objections to this. Fortunately, since this is the old battlefield at the intersection of the cold plain and the burial ground, Sarah is naturally familiar enough with it. It didn't take too much time for everyone to get in touch with Rog's scouts on the edge of the battlefield. All Rog couldn't hide the excitement and joy on their faces when they found that their captain had crawled back from hell. For a time, morale was greatly boosted. With the help of these scouts, Sarah quickly grasped the dynamics of the battlefield. She was not in a hurry to reorganize the troops in the rear, and rushed directly to the center of the battlefield. It's Lord Bloodcrow. Lord Bloodcrow is back. Long live those damn monsters, now they can finally roll back to hell. The rogues met along the way were all excited, and they didn't even notice that there was a strange man among the three people following Sarah. This Sarah has such a high prestige, the man muttered to the other two women. Of course, Sister Sarah is a super rogue who regained the title of Blood Crow. Even stronger than ordinary Amazon warriors, Tia said with some pride. Stronger than Amazon warriors? Are there any Amazons in Rogue Town? Ruger was somewhat curious. According to the original setting, Rogue is a branch separated from the Amazon tribe. Under normal circumstances, martial arts should be universal. However, judging from the performance in the original work, the Amazon female warrior, who is the protagonist of the Nephilim, is still much stronger than the ordinary rogue. Ruger has always been somewhat curious about the relevant situation of this plane. In fact, the inheritance of Amazon and rogue is similar, and now they have basically merged into one, Tia explained. Now it is just habitual to call those who join the regular army rogue, and those who only participate in the adventure team and do not fight with the large army are called Amazon. So, there are also Amazon female warriors in Rogue Town, all of whom are bodyguards trained by other Nephilim families. Oh, by the way, there is another important difference. Tia thought for a while and said again. What? Rogues do not reject the use of firearms, but Amazon only uses cold weapons. Tia's face was somewhat gloomy, because the Nephilim families who train them are all Nephilim supremacists, Ruger said, right? Yet Tia nodded helplessly. Seeing her depressed look, Ruger couldn't help but laugh and said, isn't this a good thing? What? Tia was puzzled. It is certain that the Nephilim supremacists are our enemies. Of course, the lower their combat power, the better, Luger said with a smile. If they can use the weapons of the Lost Ones, that would be troublesome. As they spoke, everyone heard the shouts of killing coming from the front, and hurriedly put on their armor and rushed over with Sarah. With the experience of fighting repeatedly in the ghostly dungeon, the three of them are no longer afraid of these monsters on the ground. These things may be stronger or weaker than the ghostly in terms of individual combat power, but their numbers are much less. Tia's high-speed grenades, Minerva's two long-handled swords, and Luger's various firearms, it is effortless to deal with the army of monsters composed of fallen demons, fallen rogues, zombies, skeletons, goat-headed people, etc. Even if there are some powerful elite monsters among them, they are quickly killed by Lugger and Sarah's double long-range precision strikes. Ruger recovered quite a lot of light and heavy weapons in the Lost Ruins, Ghost Dungeon. The pump-action shotgun, which was once his main weapon, has now become his secondary weapon for self-defense. He is currently using a G28 precision marksman rifle, also produced by HK. Generally speaking, this thing and the HK-417 he gave to Sarah can basically be regarded as the same weapon. But in fact, it is more like two very similar branches developed from the same prototype. Simply put, HK-417 is a 62 caliber version of HK-416, an assault rifle that can fire continuously. But because it is an assault rifle that can fire continuously, its accuracy is not enough. HK-417 has its own civilian semi-automatic version MR308, which cannot fire continuously, and the barrel and other parts have been improved to improve accuracy. G28 is the military version of MR308 again. From the process of the emergence of the two guns, we can see how saturated the modern light weapons market is, and the competition is simply cruel. So in a nutshell, Ruger's G28 cannot fire continuously, but it has high accuracy. And Sarah's HK-417 has a slightly lower accuracy, but it can fire continuously. This is actually very reasonable. Because Ruger's strength is still within the scope of ordinary people, he can't control the continuous firing of full-power rifle bullets at all, and the accuracy is too poor. Sarah is completely different. With her strength, Ruger doubts that even an assault rifle firing 7mm heavy machine gun bullets can be as accurate as a marksman rifle in her hands. Well, this statement is somewhat exaggerated. After all, it is well known that no matter how high the shooting accuracy of a gunner is, it can never exceed the mechanical accuracy of the gun itself. The upper limit of the accuracy of a standard gun is actually not high. Even so, Ruger, who is competing with Sarah for the elite monster head, is still at an absolute disadvantage. Because Sarah is still pursuing a headshot in burst mode, while he can only kill by shooting at the larger chest of the target. Fortunately, as long as he robs it, the system will determine that it is his kill, and he will get points. Infinite Doomsday Start draws Luodu mechanic. Author, Shanmao Aichiji. Chapter 127. After several successful kills, Sarah, who was at the forefront, couldn't help but look back and glare at someone. But seeing his playful smile, Sarah knew that this guy would continue to fight. So she simply put the HK-417 back on her back, took out a 2-meter-long spear close to 3 meters, rushed directly into the enemy, and swept the monsters with close-range attacks. Now Ruger was helpless. Although the 762 NATO bullet has strong kinetic energy, it is not an order of magnitude advantage compared to the shotgun single-head bullet. Although its effective range is longer, the longer the distance, the lower the penetration. The performance is that if Ruger needs 2 to 4 shotgun single-head armor-piercing bullets to kill an elite monster, then the 762 NATO bullet cannot kill it in one shot. So, he can only abandon those leaders and shoot those relatively powerful but not high-defense ordinary monsters. Seeing that he no longer attacked the elite monsters, Sarah, who had broken into the enemy camp, rushed towards a giant beast of the leader level. However, when she rushed to the front, she did not pierce the guy's heart with a shot, but jumped on the guy's head like a pole vault, and used the tip of the gun to pick open his skull. Then, a silver light flew out from her palm and went straight to the guy's forehead. It was the Radom parasite blade spider that wanted to parasitize Sarah but failed, and was taken as a pet by her. The giant beast of the leader level immediately wailed in pain after being directly penetrated by the blade spider from the forehead. Its long roar scared the countless demonized beast monsters around it and they immediately fled in all directions. But soon, it became completely quiet, changing its previous upright walking style and walking on all fours. Sarah sat on its back, picked up a metal shield from the ground, bent it with her hands, and put it on its forehead as a helmet, then raised her spear and rushed into the battle again like a spear knight. Seeing that she had so easily subdued a leader-level monster as a mount, the morale of the rogues on the battlefield was boosted again. The monsters were obviously a little overwhelmed, not to mention the demonized animals that had already fled. As one side gained and the other lost, the battlefield quickly tilted towards Rogue. At the same time, Ruger and Tia on the battlefield looked at each other in bewilderment. "Brother Ruger, did you see it? Sister Sarah, she actually used that thing to control the monster." Tia was a little unbelievable. "Well, I don't know how long she can control the monster," Ruger nodded. "That's great. If I hadn't bitten that thing to death, I would also like a monster mount. How cool," Tia envied. A old Noisy immediately popped his head out from her shoulder to express his dissatisfaction, as if to say, "Master, you already have me, and you're not satisfied." "What's the use of you? Can you let me ride?" Tia pouted. Old Noisy retracted his neck in disappointment. "Don't say, it really can." Ruger stroked his chin and said. "What? Woo. Have you forgotten that Old Noisy was controlling the drone just now?" Ruger said. "Then I'll build you a chariot that can be controlled by Old Noisy like a drone. Isn't it equivalent to having a mount?" "What? It's just like that," Tia pouted. "What's the difference between that and you driving me, Brother Lou?" Old Noisy was originally imagining the future after listening to Ruger's words, but was hit by his master's words and retracted his neck again. "But it's better than nothing," Tia said again. "Brother Lou, let's make it a deal. Also, I want to choose the model myself. I want a bigger and stronger cannon." Okay, Ruger said dotingly, looking at the giant beast knight who was still charging in the distance, thinking. Soon, under the leadership of the giant beast knight, the rogues finally pushed the battle line back to the original stalemate of the cold plain, the burial ground. But at this time, although the morale of the rogues was still high, Sarah stopped the attack and gathered people to build fortifications on the spot. Because ahead, it was above the strange underground city that could collapse at any time. "Thank you, everyone." After dealing with all the battlefield matters, Sarah returned to the three people again. "I know you are in a hurry to return to Rogue Town. I'm sorry I can't go back with you. But, here's this for you." She turned around and took out a pendant with a blood-red raven-shaped arrow hanging on it and gave it to Tia. "This is your arrow charm." Tia took the pendant in disbelief and looked at Blood Crow and said, "Sister Sarah, why?" "Just think of it as an insurance for you." Sarah nodded. "With it, you can get help from any rogue, including Lord Kasha. Kasha, the supreme commander of Rogue, is said to be over 80 years old and is one of the few old people who existed before the world was broken." "Well, thank you, Sister Sarah." Tia put it away solemnly and nodded to Blood Crow. "In fact, you can wait a little longer. Joshua and Woden should have received the news of our return now. Let them go back with you, it will be safer." Sarah said again. "Joshua is the werewolf druid, and Woden is the fang necromancer. No, let them stay and help you. You need help here too." Tia shook her head. "I'll come back to help you after I bring the seeds back. Let's go straight to the monster's lair." "Haha, okay." Sarah couldn't help but laugh at Tia's confident look as she clenched her fists. But soon, she turned to look at Ruger. "You are very strong. Even stronger than you show." Looking at Commander Rog, whose eyes seemed to see through him, Ruger was not afraid at all and looked back with the same sharp eyes. "Thank you, you too," she said. Sarah's eyes changed suddenly when she heard it, but she quickly suppressed it and pretended to be calm and said, "Really? Why do you say that?" "Haha, it's business mutual praise. You praised me, so I have to praise you." Ruger laughed. When he said this, the two women next to him couldn't help laughing. However, Sarah and Ruger both saw that there was no smile in each other's eyes. "No matter what, protect Tia," She is very important to all of us, Sarah said seriously. Understood. Ruger also nodded solemnly. As long as Tia is safe, I can accept any changes in other things. Brother Lu, what are you talking about? Tia said shyly, but looking at that smiling face, it is obvious that joy far outweighs shyness. It's a deal. Sarah stretched out her hand. Handshake, the etiquette of the lost. People in the dark world should not use it, but she has a name given by the lost, so it's not surprising that she would use it. Ruger looked at her hand and then her eyes, and finally stretched out his hand to shake her hand. It's a deal. Take care. After saluting the three again, Sarah went back to handle military affairs again at the urging of Adjutant Rog. The three looked at each other, and finally turned around and walked towards Rogtown. Infinite Doomsday Start draws Luodu Mechanic. Author, Shan Mao Ai Chi Ji. Chapter 128. Finally, Ruger was able to take stock of the final benefits of the series of battles. Let's talk about the tasks first. After the task of exploring the lost ruins was automatically completed, he had 4 tasks left. Taiwan Novel Network Rightward arrow dot. Task 1, Food Seeding. Task 2, Rescue Sarah. Task 3, Explore the mystery of the opening of the underground door. Task 4, Save the human resistance. The first one will probably be completed soon after returning to Rogue Town, and the last one is still a long way off. The 2 in the middle should have been completed long ago in Ruger's opinion, but the system automatically settled the account until the 4 people returned to the ground from the underground city. Now, he only has 2 tasks left. Needless to say, saving Sarah, it seems that bringing Sarah back to the ground will be completed. As for the mystery of the opening of the underground door, in Ruger's opinion, the truth is that Gui Mei used the Tower of Babel to open the passage to the ground. In this way, they can use the fallen monsters as fungal mat nutrients to feed more ghosts, and they can also select strong monsters from the monsters for random transformation and turn them into leaders. In addition, they can also find ways to establish contact with other ghost groups by opening this channel. Why this task has to wait until the 4 people return to the ground before it is settled, Lugger does not quite understand. Perhaps the system will not recognize the collection of relevant information without a landmark action? However, Lugger does not care much, as long as the system gives enough rewards for the task. The rewards for these 2 tasks are 2,000 points. Adding those earned by Lugger with the firepower coverage of the howitzer, he now has 7,000 points. During this period, there are losses such as mental strengthening potions, and there are also monster points earned when finishing Sarah. Add 1 plus 1 minus, it is still about 7,000. If the points are the most intuitive, then the physical gains, including various raw materials, parts, and even finished weapons, are the most cumbersome. In total, he recovered the resources of a World War II armored brigade. Of course, only combat units such as tanks and artillery are counted, and there are no logistics vehicles. However, at least 2/3 of them were recovered in the form of broken parts or even raw materials. Generally speaking, there are no more than 10 tank chassis that can be used directly, and there are about 30 howitzers and cannons of different calibers. The only 2 tanks that are truly complete and ready for combat are the Honey Badger small tank and the modified Ferdinand self-propelled mortar. Fortunately, with the terrifying 7,000 points, Ruger is confident that he can install all those lonely artillery on the chassis. With the addition of an automatic loader, they can be transformed into various self-propelled howitzers and self-propelled anti-tank guns. However, Ruger is not very interested in continuing to improve the old World War II guns. It would be great to recycle them into raw materials and directly buy advanced self-propelled artillery in the Cold War at a discount. What? Why not buy more advanced ones? Well, because after that, the development direction of artillery is longer range, informationization, and precision guidance. The former is not very useful to Ruger, as he has no requirements for beyond visual range combat. The latter two require a large number of electronic components as consumables. It goes without saying that a lot of points will be wasted to buy electronic chips, and the key is that in a magic environment, electronic chips can be destroyed by magic radiation at any time. Rounding off, buying more advanced ones is almost the same as buying the ones in the late Cold War. Of course, Ruger has not yet made a plan for whether to buy or how many self-propelled artillery to sell. The main thing is that if he is dealing with ghosts, then his rapid-fire mortar howitzer is enough, plus 2 or 3 powerful anti-tank guns, he can do it. But what kind of gun is more useful against monsters, he still needs to do some experiments. For example, blocking the entrance of the evil cave and giving it a few hits. Compared with the progress in material aspects, his personal attributes and skills have not stopped. Attributes: Strength 5, Agility 7, Physical Fitness 8, Spirit 6 add 2, Intelligence 6, Perception 6. Overall, he is no longer the ordinary weakling he was before, but a little Superman who is not outstanding in all aspects but has quite good endurance. With the homemade Iron Man armor to supplement the individual protection, and various weapons as means of attack, he is now really like what Sarah said, his real strength will never be lower than that of ordinary Nephilim. Skills. Skills. Single-handed gun mastery, 2 beginner. Double-handed gun mastery, 3 advanced. Ground combat vehicle driving mastery, 5 intermediate. Tracked armored vehicle expertise. Vehicle weapon mastery, 8 beginner. Vehicle mounted machine gun expertise. Vehicle mounted artillery expertise. Los Santos mechanic, 7 master. Expertise, slightly. Telekinesis, 6 intermediate. Magic shadow cloak. Extreme reaction. Telekinesis. Remote control. He didn't pay much attention to the changes in the skill bar during the fighting and killing along the way. Now that I have some free time, I realize that I have acquired many new skills without realizing it, and my old skills have also been improved a lot. For example, the levels of the 2 core skills, mechanic and telekinesis, have actually leapt significantly. He remembered that the master level mechanic skill was originally only level 3, but now it has reached level 7. It seems that there are many benefits from the recent random modification of various weapons and vehicles. As for telekinesis, it was actually directly upgraded to the intermediate level. And the 2 ways of using telekinesis that he explored were actually recognized by the system as sub-skills. Ruger is not completely sure what the benefits of the skills recognized by the system are. But for telekinesis skills, there is a very obvious benefit, which is that it can greatly reduce consumption. It is probably because remote object movement and remote control have been recognized by the system that he can operate more than a dozen howitzers at the same time to play a full volley drama. Compared with the changes in the 2 core skill trees mechanic and telekinesis, the 2 new skill trees are not so dazzling. One can be understood as a tank driver skill, and the other is a tank weapon operator skill. Weapons include machine guns and artillery. In Ruger's view, the addition of these 2 skill trees in the system panel is basically equivalent to the system recognizing Ruger's basic tank soldier ability. At present, his driver ability is stronger than his gunner ability. This is reasonable, because he was driving all the way, but most of the time, Tia was responsible for setting off the blast. Well, the driving was pretty wild. In addition to these gains, another big part was the biological laboratory facilities and related technologies in the logistics space. Biotechnology was not Ruger's strong point, and the fact that he had not been able to activate related skills from the system so far was also telling. He had no ambition to figure out everything here in the short term. Although there were 2 radom trees inside, and although he was indeed envious of the genuine Iron Man armor, he also knew that it would be difficult for him to analyze all of that high-end stuff in a short period of time. Relying on the master-level mechanics ability, he was able to analyze the technology for making artificial Iron Man armor from there, and he was already very satisfied for the time being. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Infinite Doomsday Start draws Luodu mechanic. Author, Shanmao Aichiji. Chapter 129. Another big harvest related to the biological laboratory is the tons of nuclear waste recovered from Cyber Savage/Metal Tyrannosaurus. Of course, there are also special biological tissues that can use nuclear waste as energy. According to the memory of the Ghost Leader E52, these nuclear wastes really come from the spent fuel rods of the abandoned nuclear power plants in this country. After being processed by ghosts, the concentration is increased, and they can only be used as fuel for biological reactors. However, such high-risk nuclear fuel is difficult to use properly with the mechanic knowledge system mastered by Ruger. The most likely way to use it is to use Ghost's biological technology to extract plutonium-239 from nuclear waste and make a plutonium bomb. Yes, it is the kind of atomic bomb that only needs 10 kilograms of raw materials to reach critical mass and then form a fission chain reaction and finally a nuclear explosion. Taiwan Novel Network Rightward Arrow. But to be honest, the atomic bomb as a strategic weapon sounds scary, but its role in local battlefields is very useless. The best use that Luger can think of is to bury a time bomb like plutonium bomb in places like the monster base camp and send them back to their hometown in hell together. Because there is magic radiation that blocks electromagnetic waves, remote detonation is not possible, and it can only rely on the time fuse placed in the radiation shield. But if the time is set too long, it is easy to have more dreams at night, and if it is set too short, it is easy to blow yourself up. If you calculate carefully, it is not as convenient as plowing the land with artillery. In addition to plutonium-239, there is also its isotope plutonium-240 in the spent fuel, which is a nuclide that spontaneously fissions and emits neutrons. As we all know, the key to the fission chain reaction is to give the raw material a neutron, so that it will emit more than one neutron after the fission reaction and then stimulate more reactions. In this way, if fission continues like a chain, it can trigger large-scale fission of raw materials and release a lot of energy. If this speed is controlled within a relatively small range, nuclear power plants can use the released energy to generate electricity. And if this speed is fast enough, just like violent combustion will form an explosion, this is a nuclear explosion. Under normal circumstances, the higher the quality of nuclear raw materials, the more neutrons released by the fission reaction will trigger the next reaction. Under the premise of a certain geometric shape, the minimum mass that can cause a nuclear explosion is the critical mass. The plutonium bomb made of plutonium-239 that reaches the critical mass can be normally exploded. However, because of the neutrons emitted by plutonium-240, a considerable part of the raw materials will fission in advance, which will lead to a decrease in the actual quality of the raw materials, making it easy to become a dud. It is difficult to separate plutonium-240 from plutonium-239. Not only are the chemical properties of the two nuclides completely the same, but they only differ by one neutron, and the mass is not much different. It is very difficult to make a plutonium bomb explode successfully, and it was once even considered impossible. Later, people came up with a way to make a shell similar to a charge cap instead of gathering the plutonium raw materials together. When it is necessary to detonate, use explosives to collapse the plutonium shell inward, shrink it into a small piece, reach the critical mass, and trigger a nuclear explosion. The whole process is very similar to the form of Monroe explosive armor-piercing bombs, of course, more like explosively formed projectiles. The difference is that explosively formed projectiles or self-forging warheads only need to form a projectile roughly. And the implosion of the plutonium shell to reach the critical mass requires extremely precise control of the explosion, and the error requirement is much higher than the former. The only thing to be thankful for is that it is not difficult for Ruger to do this. As a result, after repeated hesitation, Ruger still began to cultivate the kind of biological tissue that can separate and purify nuclear materials in the biological laboratory. Making an atomic bomb by yourself, even if it doesn't succeed, it's fun to try. The Big Head's harvest has almost been counted, and the remaining are some scattered light weapons. Needless to say, the old weapons of World War II, from pistols to submachine guns and rifles to recoilless guns, Ruger will definitely not use them if possible. Although the basic principles of human light weapons have not changed much in the decades after the war, the difference in ergonomics is still very obvious. Simply put, advanced light weapons are more comfortable to use, feel better, and have stronger control ability. Among many light weapons, machine guns, especially heavy machine guns, have not made much progress in the above aspects. Well, to be honest, the heavy machine gun used by the Mountain Special Operations Battalion in the 21st century is still the M2 Browning from the World War II era. Then he can only continue to use it. For other light weapons, he prefers to use modern versions. For example, MP5 submachine guns, HK416, HKG3G4 light machine guns, G28 marksman rifles, Rs9 sniper rifles, etc. But what he is really good at is still shotguns. Not only pump action, but also break action. After all-round progress, the pump-action shotgun has been relegated from his absolute main weapon position to the second line. For self-defense, the pump-action is not as good as the short-barrel break-barrel shotgun. After all, the latter can be operated with one hand. Although there is no such niche weapon as the break-barrel shotgun among the weapons collected by Ruger, its production method is not complicated. Ruger only invested a little bit of points and matched it with sufficient raw materials to make dozens of these things in the bunker. With the blessing of telekinesis, he can completely replace a full-round shotgun from the logistics space immediately after firing an empty one and continue shooting. In this way, he can easily fire hundreds of shotgun shells in a short period of time. If he builds an automatic loader in the bunker to load ammunition for the shotgun, and adds a step to cool the barrel, he can even keep firing as if he has unlimited ammunition. This move is a bit like a weakened version of his howitzer volley. Although the power is small, the side effects are almost zero, and it is a small explosive trump card that can be played at any time. In the future, this move can be used on more weapons. Especially those weapons with high power per shot, slow loading speed, and not too large size. But for now, shotguns are enough. After all, the special bullets used in shotguns are the easiest to make, making it almost the most versatile among light weapons. As for the short effective range of the shotgun, Ruger doesn't care. He just uses the short-barreled shotgun as a short-range defensive weapon. For long-range matters, the heavy machine gun on the armor is enough to handle it alone. If it's still not enough, then just use all kinds of artillery. With a huge and well-equipped logistics space in hand, Ruger is least afraid of competing with others in firepower. Speaking of which, as a Los Santos mechanic, from the beginning to now, the things he really made the most are various weapons. The only purely civilian machine he has handled personally seems to be the Dodge Challenger muscle car. As a result, he took the engine of that car and installed it on a small tank. The industrial robot arm in the logistics space also helps to make various weapons. So, he really hasn't tinkered with purely civilian machinery. He is preparing to make atomic bombs in the military, and he hasn't even made a bicycle in the civilian field. But think about it, it's normal. He, a Los Santos mechanic, has a bunker as an underground arsenal when he first appears. Los Santos mechanics are more like gunsmiths or armorers from the beginning. Infinite Doomsday Start draws Luodu mechanic. Author, Shan Mao Ai-Chi-Ji. Chapter 130. The gathering areas of survivors in the end of the world are always similar. Either they are known for their secrecy, with the main body hidden in the mountains or underground where the enemy cannot easily invade. Or they win by defense, built in a dangerous place, with thick walls and a strong city defense system. Rogue Town is a typical example of the latter. The terrain of the Bloodland is generally very flat, and it is a grassland area on the edge of the forest, and it is impossible to build a city on the mountain. However, the builders of Rogue Town did not give up. Instead, after building a tall and thick wall for a week, they dug a whole circle of moats around the wall. Well, in fact, the town is close to a natural river to the south. In this way, the defense of the town can be twice the result with half the effort, and even the problem of drinking water can be solved at the same time. The only troublesome thing is the demonized aquatic creatures in the river, such as demonized frogs, demonized water snakes, etc. In the end, Rogue Town solved this problem semi-permanently by building many small dams upstream and downstream of the river and clearing the monsters in the river inch by inch. Since then, the south side of the river has become the safest direction for Rogue Town. Coupled with the abundant water source, this place has become the main food production area in the town, the mushroom field. Around the mushroom field are the residences of the rogues. They are also responsible for the vigilance of the mushroom field. The north side of the mushroom field is close to the center of the town, where the Nephilim gathering area is also considered the main urban area. Shops such as blacksmith shops and alchemy shops are concentrated here. Further north of the main urban area is the military area of the town. There are not only playgrounds for Nephilim rogues to train, but also arenas for Nephilim to resolve personal grudges. Under normal circumstances, ordinary people who have not awakened Nephilim abilities cannot be seen in the North District. But at this time, it is extremely crowded here, as if ordinary people from the entire town have gathered here. The Nephilims who were supposed to be busy on the playground were now scattered around the square, maintaining order. A wooden platform was built in the center of the playground. In the middle of the platform stood a tall and narrow structure that looked like a door frame, with only a wooden frame and no door. On the top of the door frame hung a sharp guillotine. If this thing fell from a height of more than 10 meters, it could even cut a living person in half. This was actually a guillotine. A team of guards on the platform escorted a dozen ragged prisoners, some with dull eyes, some with sad faces. Occasionally, there were a few people with upright and piercing eyes, who were firmly controlled by the guards around them. In front of the guillotine, a paladin wearing plate armor but no helmet was passionately accusing the crimes of the prisoners on the platform to the surrounding humans. But the face that should have represented justice and fairness seemed a little distorted due to excitement. You lowlifes, bugs, parasites. Without the Nephilim to resist the countless hell monsters, you would have turned into pieces of dirty, ugly meat. You maggots, your bodies are too weak to fight, and your low intelligence makes you useless. But even so, we Nephilim still generously protect you, give you food and shelter, and find ways to create jobs for you that you can do. But you despicable guys are not only ungrateful, but also insatiable. What kind of shitty dignity do you want? You scum are also worthy of talking about dignity? Wait until you can protect a piece of land under the monster tide, then talk to me about dignity. As he said, the armored man pointed to the prisoners behind him. Look at these scumbags, you all know them. These guys keep saying they want dignity, and they want to leave the town and build a shelter for ordinary humans. Haha, they overestimate their abilities. Now, you can see that these scum who want to build a shelter not only failed to keep the shelter under the tide of monsters, but also fled back in disgrace. If it were just that, it would be fine, but they should never lead those monsters to attack our rogue town. They actually opened a shortcut for the monsters in the forest to bypass the front battlefield and attack the town directly. Do you think they should be punished? Yes, the crowd around shouted and cursed. Scum! Scum! Why don't they die outside? Then what do you think they should be punished for? The armored man asked again. Damn it! They deserve to die. Cut off their heads. Feed their meat to the mushroom field. Okay, the armored man waved his hand, since you call for justice, I will give you justice. Guards, prepare for execution. Yes. As they spoke, the two guards at the front of the line carried a prisoner to the guillotine and clamped his head into the wooden yoke. In this way, the guillotine on top would fall down and split his neck in two. Seeing this, the humans in the audience shouted and cursed even louder, as if they wanted to run to the guillotine and drop the guillotine with their own hands. In this excited and cruel crowd, there were three cloaked figures, watching this farce coldly. It seems that all the survivors in the gathering area are here, the most burly one of them said. It's a pity that they managed to escape the monster's siege, but they couldn't escape the paladin's guillotine. Tia, do you really want to save them? You know, the human resistance forces that could be used have probably all died in the battle. These guys who are in a panic, even if they are rescued, are mostly just a burden. Not to mention whether they have the courage to leave Rogue Town to rebuild the second shelter. Even if they go, they may not survive more than a few nights. Is it meaningful? The speaker is the barbarian female warrior Minerva. How do you know if you don't try? Tia beside her said in a deep voice. Besides, it was you who promised Kohler to help them when he was dying. Why do you have no confidence now? Hey, of course I have confidence, Minerva chuckled. I'm afraid that if you can't make up your mind, some people will easily work without effort. Before in the second shelter, when you found that it had been breached by monsters, you didn't notice that someone turned around and wanted to leave. Hey, you are talking bad about people behind their backs, right? Someone, it would be better if you just report my name, Ruger behind the two said helplessly. How can this be called talking bad about you behind your back? Minerva chuckled. I said this to your face. How dare you say that it didn't happen? You just say it objectively. Why add fuel to the fire? Ruger waved his hand helplessly. I didn't turn around and leave. It was because Old Noisy confirmed that there were no survivors there, so I went out to look for clues. Believe me, I want to save these people more than you do. Ruger's words were absolutely sincere. After all, saving these so-called human resistance forces can provide him with a reward of up to 2,000 points. For the sake of money, he will definitely not remain indifferent.